Have you ever observed the profound stillness that envelops a man who has truly mastered solitude? That unshakable calm radiating from someone completely at ease in their own company. While society nervously labels such independence as isolation or emotional detachment, what if this very judgment reveals our collective terror of confronting the liberation found in absolute self-sufficiency? Why does this unspoken truth about masculine solitude provoke such discomfort? Could it be that true autonomy threatens the foundations of how we measure human connection? Consider the visceral reaction when someone chooses depth over distraction, chooses silence over performance. The world interprets this inward journey as rejection, as absence. But what if it's the ultimate act of presence, presence with oneself? Jung's concept of individuation pulses here, that terrifyingly beautiful process where a man strips away the persona, the mask crafted for external validation, and discovers the raw architecture of his being. This isn't withdrawal from life. It's immersion into the primordial self, where every societal script about masculinity crumbles. When you witness such a man, undisturbed by chaos, unswayed by the hunger for approval, why does your throat tighten? Why the impulse to label him cold or disconnected? Isn't that discomfort your own mirrored resistance to inner silence, your fear of what you might hear in that void? Jung warned us, the foundation of all mental illness is the avoidance of true suffering. But what suffering do we avoid by constantly filling silence, by mistaking loneliness for solitude? This mastery isn't about physical isolation. It's the dismantling of emotional dependency, where validation becomes an internal climate rather than external weather. And here lies the unadmitted truth. Society depends on your neediness, your craving for belonging, your addiction to being perceived. The man liberated from these chains becomes untraceable. His energy no longer leaks into others' projections. His silence deafens those who fed on his reactions. Can you feel the shift when someone refuses to perform vulnerability on demand? When they no longer bargain for love with pieces of their soul? That's when you realize your discomfort isn't concern for him. It's panic. Panic at the mirror he holds to your own unexamined dependencies. Why else would his peace feel like rebellion, his contentment like accusation? Before we continue, this type of video takes time and effort. If you enjoyed the content and want to support me, you can do so through Super Thanks. Thank you to everyone who appreciates the effort. Let's complete the journey together. So, we arrive at the crux. Why is this liberation feared rather than celebrated? Because it exposes the transactional nature of most connection. We barter attention for validation, availability for security. But the man who masters solitude operates outside this economy. He becomes currencyless. And in a world built on emotional capitalism, nothing terrifies more than a man who cannot be bought, cannot be indebted, cannot be guilted into compliance. His silence isn't emptiness, it's sanctuary, a fortified space where the demons of inadequacy are faced without mediators, where the father wound, the provider burden, the warrior myth all dissolve in the acid of self-awareness. Jung's shadow work breathes here, in those uninterrupted hours where a man stares down his own darkness, not to conquer it, but to converse with it, to integrate its wisdom. Can you glimpse why institutions crumble before such individuals? Religions, corporations, even families? They thrive on the myth that wholeness requires external completion. But the solitary master embodies the heresy that the kingdom of God is within, that abundance is an interior event. His very existence questions. Why seek permission from systems when you contain your own constitution? Now feel this. The gravitational pull when such a man enters a room. How anxiety spikes, not because he demands, but because he doesn't. His lack of need radiates inverse power, exposing everyone else's hunger. This is why nobody admits the liberation. Admitting it would force acknowledgement that most relationships are codependencies disguised as love, that our constant connectivity is fear masquerading as community. And here, at this precipice, we must ask, what violence do we inflict on boys by teaching them companionship is oxygen, by punishing their natural introversions as social failures, conditioning them to believe solitude is punishment, not initiation, when in truth, the alchemy of masculinity occurs in isolation, where societal expectations are incinerated, leaving only essential selfhood. If these words resonate, consider anchoring to this channel. Your support through subscriptions fuels this excavation of hidden truths. Now, let's descend deeper, because the master of solitude hasn't escaped emotion. He's become its cartographer, mapping internal landscapes most avoid with Netflix notifications. His liberation stems from confronting a devastating paradox, that the more you depend on others for wholeness, the less whole you become. The more you cling to belonging, the more you exile yourself. Can you taste the irony? Society brands him lonely while drowning in its own epidemic of connection-starved souls. His solitude is not a vacuum, it's a universe, complete with collapsing stars of past identities and nebulae of becoming here. Jung's archetypes shift from theory to lived experience, the warrior, the king, the magician, all integrated not through roles, but through the dissolution of roles. Notice what happens when he refuses to pathologize his stillness, when he declines to apologize for his depth. The collective recoil, the whispers labeling him arrogant or detached. This reaction is primal, biological, a herd animal's terror of the creature who no longer fears walking alone. So, I ask you directly, what are you avoiding in your own silence? What truths might surface if you stopped mistaking motion for progress, noise for substance, companionship for completion? Could you bear meeting the self that exists beyond job titles, beyond relationships, beyond the masks even you've forgotten you're wearing? This mastery dismantles the core mythology of masculinity. That strength means emotional invulnerability. The solitary man embodies a different strength, the courage to be vulnerably self-contained, to hold his own fragility without outsourcing its management. His tears fall in private oceans, nourishing ecosystems of insight no applause could feed. And still, the unadmitted truth festers. His liberation threatens because it proves what we deny, that we are not fragments seeking completion, but suns learning to self-ignite, that the ache we call loneliness is actually birth pains, the self laboring to emerge from the placenta of collective expectation. But here's where society's lie collapses. This isn't a path of renunciation. It's one of radical communion with the self that existed before your first memory and will outlast your last breath. Jung's collective unconscious becomes personal sanctuary, where you converse with ancestral wisdom not through rituals, but through silence. So why the relentless cultural sabotage against male solitude? Why pathologize the very state where boys become sovereigns? Because a man at home in himself cannot be colonized, cannot be weaponized, cannot be controlled by the promise of belonging. His loyalty belongs to truth, not tribes. Now, feel your own resistance, the itch to dismiss this as romanticized isolation. That reflex is your fear speaking, your programmed belief that aloneness equals annihilation. But what if the opposite is true? That only in ceasing to seek ourselves in others do we finally appear. We approach the shadow realm, where the solitary man's greatest test awaits, not in the isolation itself, but in returning to society carrying its revelations. Can he walk among the hungry without apologizing for his fullness? Can he withstand the projections of those still lost in external seeking? This is where true liberation proves itself, not in caves, but in marketplaces, where his silence speaks louder than others' sermons, where his calm dismantles dramas simply by refusing to fuel them, where his presence, untethered from approval, becomes an unspoken invitation not to follow him, but to embark on their own inward odyssey. And so the question hangs, heavy as mountain air. What would die within you if you stopped mistaking solitude for emptiness? What ancient self might awaken if you granted it uninterrupted audience?